Welcome to the Theory of DFS podcast. I'm Jordan Cooper, the co-author of the Theory of Daily Fantasy Sports. It's a 15-hour audio DFS masterclass, the entire game theory of daily fantasy sports. It doesn't matter what sport you play. We're playing NBA now, kind of NFL a little bit. PGA's back, MMA's coming back, MLB hopefully back in April. It doesn't matter. Even if they get rid of all the sports and we get the esports back, right? And we're all in LOL and LCK contests, it still applies. So go to theoryofdfs.com, pick up the course today. Join with me, as always, as usual, as most of the time, is a higher stakes, smaller field, single entry specialist, or 3-max specialist, I guess, depending on the contest. It's Erik Beimfohr. And last week, Eric, we talked, we got a lot of good feedback on like the reality. Like a lot of people say that this is one of the more real shows of DFS, and that's why you like doing it. That's why I like doing it. We're talking about like our real play, our that it's not just the Instagram photos of our DFS play. And last week, talking about downswings from last year, which includes 2 big ones for me. You didn't have the greatest of NFL seasons. And people now people have something to compare it to. Are they going through the same things that everyone else is? And most likely you are. But in the past week, it seems kind of funny that we talk about downswings. Like, oh yeah, this is bad. This is why Eric. This is why these yearly periods are so arbitrary, right? If we shifted the year, calendar year, about a week and a half in a certain direction, like. Both me and you had great Tuesdays in comparison to our play volume, and like on this past Tuesday, you won the Thunderdome as well as came in second on FanDuel in a big contest. You net, I don't know, but the net, but gross 90,000, and then over the past week, I've been playing these smaller field. Like the contest that you play, maybe not the $1,500 version, but the $100, $250 versions of that. I played the 888 yesterday even, so I took a stab into that. I min cash, so that was fine. And I came in first on Tuesday, the same day that you won, and I came in second on Saturday, and that's why I've been kind of trolling, tweeting you, saying I think I'm picking this stuff up, and you're like, well, I hope you stay out of my fucking contest.
Exactly. Like I start to finally start bringing back in some money, and then you're making your way into my contests and winning them. So I don't know. It's like it's a double-edged sword, right? We start to talk about these things last week. We start to talk about losing money, and then we start winning. But then I also now have to deal with you, us talking about you getting into smaller field contests and stuff, and now you're winning them too. So it's like we joke about like, oh, saying good luck to people as long as you're not in my contest, and now I can't even say good luck to you because you're playing.
But are you playing the 253 max? Are you playing the $100 Showtime? Are you playing those contests?
Sometimes it kind of depends. So like I know it maybe like those. If you're playing in like a $1,500 contest or something like that, or 2,000 or 5,000. It doesn't sound like, oh, just toss it into the 250, but I do attempt to manage my bankroll a little bit. So not always. It kind of depends. If I don't really play those when I get into the $2,000 and $5,000 stuff. But if I'm, more in like the 888, like, or maybe I want to play multiple teams, like in the 888 instead of playing higher stakes, then I might play in like the 250. So it just kind of depends, slate to slate.
So we will end up seeing each other on the leaderboard at some point, but it's kind of weird for me to say. I've been doing this for the past little over a week, so since like past Sunday, where all I'm doing is making 5 lineups or 6. Like yesterday, I played the 888. That was my 6th lineup. I was like, I'll give it a shot. So mostly I'm playing $530 worth of GPP volume. This is on top of like I'm playing $3,000 worth of cash volume. So like all. My GBP versus cash balance is in sync, right? So like if I lose all $530, I could still have a profitable day. I mean, like it's still fine. So the 530 is typically a 250. That's a 3 max contest or 4 max or something. I only play one entry. Then I play the $200 showtimes. One is like 600 entries, one is like 300. Then I play the $40 mid-range jumper. One is like 1100 and the other is like 700. Like it's typically like that, but the minimum first place for those contests is $5,000. Right? So like it's either 10,000, 12,000, 15,000 or 5,000, 7,500, something like that. And I'm building 5 separate lineups, not just one lineup into all 5 contests. But because I don't need super leverage, or I don't need, galaxy brain, whatever, like I'm building them. It's weird for me to look at lineups and go, I think this may be too chalky, and then it wins. And then I'm like, okay, I guess that was fine. Like I'm used to having to try to beat 60,000 people. So it almost feels like I'm building my cash lineup, and then I'm kind of building 5, to me, cash-like lineups. And I thought that I wasn't going to I thought it would take me longer. Maybe this is just variance. Obviously, if you come in first and you come in second in the course of 5 days, I got it figured out. Maybe I don't. Maybe it's just, just got lucky. Maybe it's just variance. But I feel like I made the shift in my mind in 2 directions. One, that I was able to build lineups that weren't like galaxy brain nutso, that still had enough leverage. Because, I understand the concepts. It's just a matter of that balancing act. And 2, not having that FOMO of building those galaxy brain, like not having the FOMO of, this is a slate where I could build 50 lineups into the fadeaway that are super leverage, and like I could make 100K today. Of course, that happens once a season, maybe. I thought maybe I'd have that fear of missing out, and I didn't. It almost was less stressful focusing on just like a handful of lineups where I don't have to necessarily worry about, well, today could be the day OG Anunoby puts up 45 points. Like unless I need a small forward and he just projects well, like it's quite possible that even if he does put up 45 points, I could still win without him. Yet in a large field contest, it's almost impossible. As long as he's owned like 3 or 4%, like it's going to be hard to win one without him. Is it weird for me to say that I kind of like it better now?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't even know who I'm talking to anymore. Like, how are you gravitating to this style of play? But no, I really do think, that's how I felt. So I don't think it's funny at all that you feel that way. There's this, it's just this balance, right? Of like you're playing 1 to 5 teams. So like, if your core strategy for that slate fails, you have no outs, right? Like, when you're just dead, right? That $500 is gone. You don't have the chance for that 1 out of 50 or 1 out of 150 to make up for, a typically bad slate. So that's part of the risk that comes on. But to me, that comfortability of, I'm trying to look through the results last night, and there really wasn't anybody that was totally off the wall that kind of went nuts. But, a lot of slates that does happen, right? Like you said, OG Anunoby or some random backup, right? Somebody gets hurt in the first, right? Which that happens sometimes, right? Okay, Thomas Bryant got hurt, not last night, but the slate before. It's like, okay, nobody was playing Mo Wagner. I don't know, maybe some crazy person in the lotto, right, in an $8 contest is playing Robin Lopez or Mo Wagner or whatever. But you get into any even like semi-small field, you just don't have to worry about those things. So it's a balancing act between like, look, I'm only playing 1 team or I'm only playing 3 teams or whatever. So like, it could.
But the mindset, like you mentioned about, like, I don't have any outs. Like I'm used to losing 90% of nights as it is.
Yeah.
Like to me that whole thing of like, if all 5 of my lineups are wrong and I fail, then like that's not what I'm scared. That's, to me, I'm used to that. I could play $800 worth of large field lineups and get $80 back. Like I'm aiming for first. I'm used to
Right.
that. It's more of the I see the difference. Eric, I respect what you do a lot more. Seeing the comparison between how I this is kind of weird. It's only been a week, yet I'm going to say how I used to play the small field GPPs
Hmm.
versus how I now do. Because what I used to do is I would make my cash lineup. That's easy. That's 30 seconds. You're done. Uh, make my large field build, 80 to 100 lineups. I'm using lineup HQ, doing, spending an hour or whatever. And then I would have like 3 small field. A lot of times I'm doing this in NFL, not necessarily in
Yeah.
basketball, but in NFL. I'm like, I have my power sweep lineup, I have my spy lineup, and I'm just like kind of I'm doing like the best of type of thing.
Hmm.
Like, okay, it's an hour before lock. What do I feel like doing? Okay, let's do this line stack. I'm almost being too nonchalant about it,
Yeah.
and I end up making lineups that are truthfully over leveraged, or just they don't project well enough for the leverage that I'm getting because I'm in that large field mindset. So I'm like, what's the best of in my build? Like, well, my build has nothing to do with. I'm trying to win the slant. I'm trying to
Yep.
win,
Yep.
those types of contests. So even my best lineup in my build is still probably not good. It still projects too low enough for the spy, even though that contest is 4,000 entries, which is still big enough. Now I'm playing these contests that are 300, 400, 800, 1,000 at the most, and now I'm like, well, I'm not going to fade this guy. This is obvious. I'll take my projection if I fade this guy. People are gonna. This guy's going to be a little too chalky, but he's at a position where there are other viable candidates that I could play. So like, okay, so instead of playing Embiid, I play Vooch, right?
Yep.
And since I'm playing Vooch, I'll play Drew Holiday. Well, now obviously Drew Holiday didn't get there. Yes, on yesterday's slate that I'm giving the example for.
Hmm.
But once I do that, once I play Vooch at like 6% instead of Embiid, and I play Holiday at 2% as a correlation on the other side of the game, it's like the rest of basically all I'm doing right now is how do I fit the chalkiest, best rejected players around the rest of my entire lineup, and what positions are they in, and I could even do that in lineup HQ and just lock, optimize. That's my lineup, and
Yeah.
to me it because I understand the concepts that are in a course like theoryofdfs.com. Uh, I've always considered like my strength should be in large field contests because uh, number one, you obviously have a lot more dead money in it. Because I'm playing these contests, I'm looking at the leaderboard in the 8088, and like I recognize everyone's name. Like it's not like what it's not large field where it's like who this guy, like random guys, and like I don't know who half the entries are. Uh, but also that the the lineups that I'm making are I feel more. It's kind of weird to say I feel more confident in. Like all I need is like this one or two things to happen, and
Yeah.
I could legitimately win first place. While in a large field, I'm like I need chaos. Like
Yes.
I don't even know what the
Yep.
chaos is going to be, but I'm building 100 lineups for 12 different versions of chaos. Right? That's
That's
kind of what you're doing, but in smaller field I'm like I don't even need chaos.
Yeah.
I just need things to happen 90% as likely as they should happen, with about 10% of who knows what happens. This game blows out and no one expects it, or
Right.
or this guy gets into foul trouble and this other center does well, type of thing. And like as long as that happens, like everyone else is kind of rostering. It's weird to say, like just like at the poker table, it feels like I'm playing. I don't want to call everyone average players, but like I get a sense of what my opponents are doing more than in a large field contest where I just need like the macro, what most people are going to do, and there could be crazy stuff in a lot of people's lineups. But I mean, we saw like I think someone won the 888 with the snowflake. I won on Sunday. I came in. No, I won. I won the 5,000 in the Showtime with 17 points from Cantor with a snowflake in my utility spot, and I'm sitting there going, "Oh, okay." And then you look and you see like Danny Green's 9.5 snowflake in the winning 888 lineup because the small forward position outside of Oladipo, really no one got there. But the contest only has 700 entries, 800 entries into it. Like the likelihood of like Oladipo was low enough owned that you needed the perfect combination kind of around him in order to get that first place spot. So if no one had that combination, Danny Green's 9.5 won. So
Yep.
like that's to me. I know to people that play the small field, they must be listening to me going, yeah, that is what it is. But when you come from large field contests, it's a culture shock, and and to me it shows that like no, I got the same strengths that I have in large field contests apply to small field contests. It's just that the edge between players is much narrower, right? I have a much bigger edge against bad players in large field contests, or
But you have to
players
get
that
less
play
things.
right, or players that
things have to
get
happen.
too much
Yep.
chalk. But in
Yep.
these small field contests, I take a look at Utical's lineups. I took a look at FJ Bourne. I take a look at in that contest, in the Showtime, in the 888 now, and I look at these lineups and I go, yeah, that looks like these look like my lineups, just with like a 2v2. Just like, yeah, everyone played this guy. Most people played the people that didn't play that guy played the other. Like everything makes logical sense. But in the back of my head, Eric, I have to think. Although I did well the past week, like if that's the edge, how much edge is there? And even though the variance in large field contests is drastic, I'm in the back of my head, wouldn't I rather play against worse opponents? I'm looking at these 888 lineups going, how do I beat these guys? I'm going through, I'm scrolling, Eric. I was going in my app. Let me take a look at this. Let me take a look at this. And I'm looking at lineups going, that makes sense. That makes sense. That makes sense. Like, is there any bad lineups in this contest? Or is anyone maybe there's a couple, maybe 5%. But that's the thing that I question. That's what I wanted to bring to you on we don't even have a large enough sample to I don't even judge this. But is that at least in the back of your mind going like, are my results even over the past saying my in your case, results over the past 3 or 4 years a product of variance, or is there edge in this contest over the rake?
It's a good question. So I did just want to go back really quick, and my favorite example of what you said of like not having to have perfect lineups, right, in these kind of contests on, what was it, last Friday or whatever, they had their DraftKings had their special like 2021. They always do that.
Right. I didn't, but yeah, you weren't gonna catch. I was gonna be dead in that. That would be like half my volume for a day. Come on.
So Peter Liu is his name. He won it for $3,000.
And I love Peter. Peter.
Yeah.
He may be the most deserving person to win 300,000.
I totally agree. It was the next person besides myself to win it. I would want no one, anybody that ever says like, oh, I'm just as happy that he won it, they're fucking liars. But other than myself, Peter,
I wasn't in the contest. Hey, Eric, I wasn't in the contest. I could root for him.
That.
He won with the 0.
Alex Len. Yep. So, but it kind of outlines a little bit of the answer to your question, but also some of the stuff you were talking about before. So I think it's definitely a little bit of variance for sure. But I think my willingness, even more so than my opponents, to embrace that variance. I know that they're making good teams, but I'm willing to take it like one small step further than they will. And I just get crushed plenty of nights. But like the night that Peter won, I can't even remember who was like super popular early. It's probably another, one of these teams that has some guys out. And I did the same thing as him. I think like the Celtics were shorthanded, whatever. He basically like there was like one guy that you like almost had to play, like a Tyrese Maxey situation. I think it was LeVert. KD and Kyrie were both out. He just locks LeVert in. people are playing all these other nets. People are playing some of these other punts from these early games. And then we had some really good late games, but it was like, we had the Raptors situation, but outside of them, there weren't like any super awesome plays there. But he just like full faded all the early games, and then like, okay, let me see what happens here, right? Because the other guys like outside of LeVert were fine projections and they were fine plays, but being willing to kind of like take on that variance, like, dude, by 8 p.m. you could be dusted, it could be over, you could have just pissed away $2,000. But none of those plays are such strong projections, right? They're not Tyrese Maxey. They're not you get Luka out and you get Jalen Brunson for 3,000. Like, they're not those situations. So you're just willing to take on a little bit of that variance, and you don't even know, like you said, you're not even like really building a team. Like, your team's not built until like after the whole first wave of games are over. And then we just so happened that night, we had the Raptors situation with Kyle Lowry sitting, so multiple other Raptors were really strong plays. They end up starting Alex Len at center, which is totally unforeseen, which is like, but that's the kind of situation you're trying to capitalize on in that circumstance. I'm fading these early games. Maybe nothing pops up, and I'm playing a slightly less, slightly lower projected lineup, but maybe something does pop up. Right. And that night we had the Lakers on the late slate, and both LeBron and AD were questionable. I think they both played, but it besides the point. Like, you're just trying to see kind of, use that optionality to your advantage. So that's the optionality aspect. So Peter uses it, pivots onto a team that somehow still wins the $2,000 tournament with Alex Len 0. Alex Len played 4 minutes, did not record a statistic, and never went back into the game. And Peter still won the tournament, but he capitalized on just that optionality, but also just like some of these projections, in my opinion, are a lot more fragile than most of. I don't even know that our opponents aren't giving it enough credit, but they just don't necessarily care enough. So last night, I'm sure that you remember Cam Johnson from the Suns was like a really strong median projection. He plays like 25 minutes every night. He's like super consistent and super steady in the 20 to 25 point range. He was like wildly owned, one of the highest owned players on the slate, because that projection was just so strong for his like $4,000 price. But like, you get these guys that, yes, that median projection makes sense. I had no doubts about what his projection looked like. But you have a guy, like an ancillary player on a team who there's like no paths to him playing big minutes. Like, there's no real path to him playing like 10 minutes. There's no path to him playing big minutes. There's no path to him getting like extra usage. That's, we've seen it with the Nets a bunch of times, right? Look, God bless Taurean Prince. I get that he projects well for $3,000, but like, he's never going to shoot like 15 or 20 times. He's never going to play 35 minutes. Like, those kind of guys always project well and always get a ton of ownership in these contests. And like, when they do well, that's fine. You just lose. But being willing to kind of take on a slightly less projected guy, maybe that's in a later game, maybe that's in like, I love doing the like Vooch and Drew Holiday thing, like you talked about, or last night with the Sixers using some Hawks guys instead. If you're playing Sixers, those kind of things, it's very different every single slate. But I think over the long haul, it's not that you are playing these contests better than anybody, but I think if you do this slate after slate after slate, you have maybe more first place equity than the majority of your opponents, which is all I'm really shooting for, right? I want to get first place. And I think you can give yourself in NBA, maybe even more than any other sport, you can give yourself more first place equity in these tournaments over the long haul than like, look, everybody's playing a stack in baseball or football or whatever. Like, yeah, you can do all the right things in tournaments, but I think in NBA, it's such a different sport with all these different little variables, and so much less about correlation that that's how I feel. Like just the way like Peter played it so perfect doing something like that, and it's a great illustration of like he had like his cumulative ownership on his team, like especially if you take off Levert, it was like a bunch of 1% guys, but it wasn't like he went in trying to play that. It's just how it played out when he used his optionality to his advantage. So that's long-winded way of saying I think that there's like a ton of different variables, but it's kind of all about using a specific variable on that slate to give you as much like first place equity as you can
Right.
get.
I think that the point that you're making is with the fragility of projections in the smaller field contests that are higher stakes, you would have to say that 90+% of the field is using projections.
Oh yeah.
Right. Is using some type of projections, whether it be their own, an aggregate of others, I mean, they're looking at projections as much as you do, and in NBA, projection models are not going to be that different from one another. Like we're talking about the difference of a point here and a point there. So, like you mentioned with Cam Johnson, you're like, Cam Johnson projects well for his position on a slate where small forward was garbage. Essentially, that's the only reason why he fits into lineups, because you're filling your guard spots with Sixers, your center spot with a Sixer. You're like it just works out that you need a 4 to 5K level small forward to fit into that type of high projected construction, and doesn't make Cam Johnson a good play. Just that the lineup makes sense with him in it, but everyone else knows that also. Like that's what projections will tell you. So since you know that that's what the projections tell you, you're like, well, everyone else is probably looking at the same thing anyway. Also, so you're like,
Yep.
is there a way? This is the way that you should approach it. Is there a way? And this is maybe kind of method of how you think, because it's very similar to how I think also. If I X'd out Cam Johnson, what do my lineups look like? Yep. Right? And then like you may do it by hand. I may do it with lineup HQ with an optimizer and go, let me try to play Cam Reddish. He's a little bit more money. He's 5,100, but he correlates with the 76ers, and he's going to be 3 or 4 times less owned. Because he doesn't project as well. But he doesn't project like horribly, but right. It's like it's underneath Cam Johnson. And then I see what those lineups look like, and I go, okay, I think that's doable, right? You look, and then you go, well, let's see if I can play an Oladipo lineup. Like, let's say I pay up at small forward. Like, what do my lineups look like? Now, I played an Oladipo lineup that had Mitch Robb at center because I had to pay down somewhere. Mitch Robb had a good game. Of course, the whole lineup didn't get there, or like I min-cashed like yesterday. But that's what you're describing as basically using the projections against your opponents because you know they're using projections. Now, but the thing is, Eric, they're also most of them are also doing the same thing. Like we're not talking about robots here. That it's like, no, we're going to play the top 18. We have 18 lineups to put into this contest. We will play top 18 optimal. Like, no. Like, no one's doing that. They're adding some form of leverage calculation to it or they're running a simulation of the contest, of the size and the ownership, and going, who most likely appears in optimal lineups and wins first place, those types of simulations. So they're going to get different in spots. And they may get different in some weird spots, depending on how fragile the projections are. You're essentially doing that, and I'm doing it also. Like when I play Drew Holiday and Vooch, we're doing the same exact thing of everyone knows the information. I have projections, I'm gonna win. Ain't gonna cut it in these contests. Like in and of themselves.
Yeah, I bet you'll actually. Not only is it not going to cut it, you're just going to constantly donate money because, like you said, you're using literally the same baseline as everybody else, and then they're playing the game even better than you are. Right. So they know the same information that you do, and then they're using that against you, which is what we're talking about here. But I do think NBA has become there's kind of a third level of you're using this. We're all using the same baseline information, and then we're all tweaking it. So then, how do I take it kind of one step further without being too crazy?
Right. But I mean, and those directions, there could be 100 of them, right?
Yep.
And that's what you'll see. And that's why when I said I look through all the lineups in the 888, and I'm going through one, like, let me take a look at Chipotle's lineups. Let me take a look at whoever. I mean, I can name everyone. I mean, like, it's very rare. I'm going through going, is there anyone I don't recognize in this contest? And that's where I pose the question of, like, I'm going through, okay, they did this. Oh, okay, I see. Oh, they played Randall here instead. Okay. They didn't play Maxey, but they played Joe with Embiid, and they played Brogdon in the okay, I get that. And then I go through all of that, and I sit there going, yeah, these. If I had the choice of making all the lineups, these are the lineups that I mean, like, all those leverage points. It's like, oh, there's that leverage point. There's this leverage point. There's that one. Like, it seemed like no one went the Drew Holiday route. Maybe for a reason. Maybe that's why he was 1% owned. But I thought it made sense with Vooch, and Vooch projected well, or whatever. And the rest of the lineup was chalk as fuck. So there are still those, like, you see all the routes. It's just a matter of which ones are you going to use. But that still comes down to the question of, do you believe, and there may not be an answer to this, or it may take you with such a large enough sample size to even get an answer of, do you believe that you'll choose the correct routes more often than your opponents, more than the rake, that long term, if this contest was full of equally or reasonably narrow skill level, is the game beatable?
Yeah, I think it's.
I don't know if there's an answer. Like I'm saying, I'm not posing
right,
it like you should have an answer. I don't know if there is an answer.
No, I don't know. I don't know if there is an answer either. But I think the evolution of trying to answer that question is kind of like how you find out. So how I would, like, I don't know. Let's just say I don't have an answer. I don't know the answer to that question. We'll probably find out in a year or 2 or 3 or something.
Maybe someone has the answer. Maybe. Well, here, this is the way that you know that the answer exists. Okay. Truthfully, if you just go by, like, Occam's razor, if you just go by, like, if whoever has the answer isn't playing, right?
Oh, yeah.
It almost has to make sense. Like, if you had the answer to that question and the answer was yes, it's not beatable, that means anyone that you're playing against in the contest, that isn't the answer. So obviously, if I asked Brian Hooper and I said, "Are these games beatable?" and he goes, "No," I'd be like, "Well, then why the fuck are you playing them?" So, like, the answer is not going to be no, because if you didn't think that, unless you just like I'm just fuck it, I'm just like, it's even rake and I just have nothing better to do. But I mean, I assume the people that play these contests are top plus EV players that give a shit. So the guys that put in, like, one cash lineup and play, like, them all, that's to me, I put them in a different bucket. But I'm talking about the ones that just play GPPs to play GPPs. Just from a logic perspective, right? It's more likely that the answer is that it is beatable because all these top players are playing it, unless it's just one big delusion.
Because it's still, at the end of the day, a game between two humans, right? So, like, you're going through and you're seeing, look, these are all smart, what we're talking about as smart lineups. But now we know that they're doing that, right? I know, you're over the last week figuring out that they're doing that. This is how I know that they're doing things every single night for multiple years now, and, like, they're going to win plenty. And a lot of these guys, one thing that I don't think gets taken into account, maybe as much, as if you look at that field of players, say in the 88, or especially, I think where my biggest edge is even as we move up to higher stakes and really small fields. Like, if you look at, I don't even know what it is tonight, like the $2,000 contest on DraftKings, like 30 people, like 30 entries. So half that field is like cash game teams, and then the other half is like maybe some of these pivots off of this cash game team. So like last night in that, Cam Johnson was like 70% in that. So, like, that one small decision in and of itself in that contest is like, like that's it. That's the make or break point, right? And then you just add one or two little little layers on top of there, right? Like you play Vooch, and you're like the only person with Vooch in there. Vooch breaks the slate, and Cam Johnson doesn't. It's like boop, win, right? Like that's it. And that's a lot of the times what happens to me. But the other thing about like as we expand into some of these contests that you're specifically talking about is these guys, this is not the entire focus of these guys play. So they're playing quality teams in there, but they're maxing all the MME contests or they're in the bucket of the cash game players. Like you said. So I still think there are ways to manipulate your opponents, even though they're making what we would perceive as good teams. Identifying to your kind of question, how do you identify that on a slate to slate basis? That is very much so the difficult part, I think. The thing that I have that I kind of wanted to bring up that I've started to really feel strongly about this year is like what I talked about with what Peter won with. It's largely what I've had the most success with so far this year, and it's optionality in NBA. I don't think enough people, because it feels so damn uncomfortable to like set a lineup at lock and honestly really have no idea what you're going to play. Like,
is that what you? There's a difference, for instance, between planning it out and basically saying, I'm going to put a default lineup that just has APM players just so lock could just pass and I just have more. And like, it is what it is. Like, to me, there's a difference, because there was one slate last week with the Kawhi national TV game thing that I knew so many people were going to plan as if Kawhi was sitting. Right.
So do the opposite.
And I said, no, I'm playing early play. I'm going to act like he's playing, because I think too many people are going with the optionality method, and they're shoving in Lou Williams and Batum and all those guys. And I'm like, if I'm going to play a $4,000 player, I'm going to play an early player. And if I get screwed, I get screwed. Fine, whatever. But I just think that my lineup construction, because I'm still playing the small field contest, so this isn't for large field. I'm just like, I'm just going to, if anything, I could predict, okay, Eric, this is what I did. I went into lineup HQ and I locked in George and Batum. And they said, what do these lineups look like? Mm-hmm. And then I could tell based on RG projections, which is going to be similar enough to other people's projections, on who they're likely not to be able to play. Like what are those lineups looking like pay up at shooting guard? So I'm like, they're not going to be able to pay up at power forward. They're not going to be able to play this guy at center. And then I just go, well, I'm just not going to pay up. Because what's going to end up happening if Kawhi plays is that George doesn't become like a bad play. It's just that it's not a great play anymore. So I look and I go, they're going to have to pivot from this shooting guard. They're either going to have to stay on George, or they're going to have to go down to, I don't know who they were playing that day. Like, I see how, like, you get screwed. Like, if you try, like, if you try to pivot away, like, you get locked in and you're in a bad spot. So I'm like, how do I get around the bad spot? And I'm like, let me just play a 6K level shooting guard in that spot from an early game. I can't play Paul George at all, but I'm banking on the fact that Kawhi is going to play, and none of these guys you're going to be stuck. You're going to have to go down at shooting guard and then play Kawhi in the forward spot where you used to have Batum in it. And it's like, this lineup is just too lopsided. Like, you're going to leave 700 on the table. I mean, it just gets you into a mess. So to me, I exploited that. I'm just saying, I'm banking on it's kind of weird to say that I used the same strategy as they did in the reverse of everyone's going the optionality route and I'm doing the other route. A lot of nights you don't get to do. A lot of nights we have nothing to expect or anything. So you're doing the, I'm going to just expect the unexpected in the late games, or like we saw last night, Buddy Hield and Rashawn Holmes were questionable. And you're like, if you looked at some of the reports, they were probably 75% to play. But what happens if they both don't play? We have these Kings that you're going to have guys that are going to be 2% owned because no one planned on the Kings, and people have Pacers in their lineups.
Yep.
So, like, I can understand. I'm going to guess, Eric, to some extent, that you thought of how do I play Brogdon, Sabonis, and Bagley slash Barnes or Halliburton, like those types of lineups. And the question is, did you think about that before lock, or and then set up your lineups accordingly? Or did you kind of like, you knew of that situation, but you're like, I don't have to think about it until 9 o'clock?
Yeah. So I definitely shouldn't say like, oh, you have no idea who you're playing. That's a slight exaggeration. Well, it's a massive exaggeration. But you're definitely planning for things. But in certain circumstances, so like again, using like Peter's example, you have a bit of a plan, but to your point, you're also like open to expecting the unexpected. You're like, okay, you start to toy around with things. I can do some things here, but a lot of the times you're either waiting on news or waiting on seeing what happens, gathering that information about what has happened already, right? You fade X chalk player and they go for 50, they're 5,000 and they go for 50. Okay, I got to do some very different things here with my lineup than I would have to do if that guy went for 10 or something. So it's definitely a very nuanced kind of answer. You're definitely not, 99.9% of the time, not just like locking in something with late game guys and saying fuck it and figuring it out later. You're definitely doing some planning, but there's different levels to the planning. That like, so last night, as an example, I was definitely planning, but I kept toying around. I wasn't fading Sixers. I'm playing some kind of Sixers. And then I was looking at the Cam Johnson thing. I played Cam Reddish. I ended up landing on Cam Reddish and Trae Young, and with some Sixers, and basically just stacking that game up, which that went well. So I still wanted to leave some sort of optionality for exactly like what you talked about with the Kings. I think it's more than likely that they sit. But the other thing that happened was Nick Nurse came out, and for like the 10th game in a row, he said he's going to change the starting lineup again, or he might change the starting lineup or something. I don't know. The Raptors are a mess. Well, yeah. Then you have Chris. You have Chris Boucher, who just apparently puts up 50 points every single night, whether he starts or not. So there was just some things in flux, and so I didn't really know, who out of all that I was going to play. I had a forward spot and a utility spot, but I was, so I had an idea, right? I went through a bunch of different 2v2s, but there was like 10 of them, 15 of them, I don't know, between all of that. And I really wasn't sure, but I wanted to gather that news. And then ultimately when the game got close and I had, who was starting and were Holmes and Buddy playing, then I would decide. But so it's like yes and no, I guess, to that question. Are you planning? Yeah, ultimately yes, you are planning, but there's different levels, I think, to the planning. You could be like, okay, we don't know if Anthony Davis is going to play. Let's start planning out, okay, if he's in and if he's out, let's build a couple different teams. But it could also be, so the night that I had, the night that I won the other night was the night KD was out to COVID protocols. It was the first game, I believe, that he was out to COVID protocols, and they were playing the Jazz. The Nets were playing the Jazz. And so Kyrie was like, expensive, but very affordable. He projected, as basically the best expensive guy on the slate. And then you had like all these Nets, but it was kind of really uncertain about exactly. And they changed their starting lineup. The Nets were like a little fragile, but they were all popular. And then the Jazz were popular on the other side. So it was like everybody was playing that game, which made sense in theory, but everybody was doing it. So I just I completely faded the game. And there were late games that night that were interesting, but they definitely projected worse than that game. And you just kind of play the variance game. The game blew out. It blew out in the total opposite direction of what people thought it might do. The Jazz lost by 30 or something to the shorthanded Nets, which is like that. Like I would call that variance, but I'm willing to take on that variance and play the optionality game. If the Nets did well, I wasn't dead. In like you can still maybe scrape your way to a min cash, but I'm playing to the low percentage outcome where that game blows out, or people are just picking the wrong Nets, right? Or people pick the wrong Jazz. It's not Donovan Mitchell, and it's it's Joe Ingles or it's Jordan Clarkson. Like I can play that leverage play, but in the going back to the contest that we're talking about, you don't have to hit every single one of those. I can just say, look, like my opponents aren't going to get it right. I may not get it right either. Sometimes I am going to leverage that, definitely. But sometimes I'm just going to wait this out and see, maybe it does. Maybe it blows out and I get lucky. Maybe my opponents just screw it up and I don't have to play the nuts, but my opponents definitely don't have the nuts. So I just got to beat them. It's this weird balancing act every single slate, I think, between all these different variables that I think that is the thing that gives you an edge long term. But, night to night, I'll screw it up sometimes. I screwed it up last night. But, you go back and you keep making that decision time after time after time. And I do think you can extrapolate an edge in your win equity. Like I'm trying to beat these guys in these small field contests. I'm trying to take first. I'm just going to take last a lot before I get there. Whereas they really are going to make a lot more teams that come closer to the cash line than I will. So I think I take on a little bit even more variance than these other players in these contests.
Right. I mean, because if I take a look at that slate, like I'm looking at results DB right now, and like that's what I did that slate. Like, and my lineup on that slate had none of that game. I essentially played. This was a slate where Jokic was chalk in the center spot because there was no centers to pay up for, and it seemed like you had the Minnesota was playing. What it was basically Minnesota versus Portland. Or versus Chicago. Yeah, no, it was Minnesota. It was Portland versus Chicago in the late game. And these are two teams with horrible defenses.
Yep.
And it's like, and it was Denver versus Minnesota. So my line, right. So this was my lineup.
Those two teams had just played, and the Minnesota side was really popular. But then we got this Nets stuff, and it just kind of flipped the whole slate around, right? So where now the Minnesota guys who were just popular, but they just got they lost by 30 or something, so they all sucked. Now it flipped the slate totally around. I was like, well, I can just play these. Why can't I just play these guys again?
Right, because I looked at the cheap Nets, and this was my thought process of LeVert is super chalk. Now people that play LeVert are going to play Jazz. So they're going to play Mitchell, or maybe they'll play Gobert's leverage instead of Jokic in the center. But my attitude is that LeVert was the number one leverage point. And LeVert or Jokic were the two leverage points on that slate. That those are the two chalky players. The center position was so bad that slate that if you faded Jokic, you really did. Like, I don't know what I would have done. It Zubac was like the next bet, and then come on, that's ridiculous. So I'm like, the best bet would be for me to fade LeVert. But then that you get like this compounding thing of, well, if LeVert doesn't do well, that means the Jazz don't do well. That means the game may not do well, and it's all chalky. So I'm like, is there a way for me to, if I don't play LeVert, can I play cheaper guys that aren't Nets? And I'm like, Juancho Hernan-Gomez is 3,400. And he's against Jokic. He's in the same game as Jokic. Taylor Horton-Tucker. I know he's just coming off the bench or whatever, but he's 3,400. He's still better than Jeff Green or Taurean Prince or name any net that was going to be twice as owned. So I'm like, I need a small forward. So I'm going to shove him in. And then I take a look and I go, well, this Portland-Chicago game has a high total and these teams don't play defense. So why don't I just play C.J. McCollum and Kobe White against each other? And I had lineups that had Levine and Lillard. So it's like I was like doing that because I wasn't playing LeVert in those lineups. So I have these guard spots at those price ranges available. And then I could just jam in Jokic into these lineups. And Cantor just ended up being like the last piece. But he's in the Portland game also. So like this lineup makes sense to a leverage point of the Nets-Jazz game failing.
Yep.
And that's all I needed.
The other thing I think that also was and ended up being interesting about that slate was, and I can't remember now, maybe you remember, but Paul George sat out.
Right. I had Batum in my lineup. I had Batum at 8% in my lineup.
But I don't think we knew that.
No,
I
no,
don't know.
it was the day, Eric. It was the day where we didn't know it before lock, and then at like 8:30 Eastern, he got turned into questionable. Like it
Yep.
was at that, and at 8:30, people are starting now to remove him from lineups, right? That type of but we didn't know before lock, which means that if you had nets in those spots, it's kind of hard to move around. But
Yep.
the thing was, the difference between me and you, I think, is that I planned the fade. Like I wasn't like, oh, I'm just gonna fade the first game and then see what happens. It's like I'm gonna fade Levert in this lineup. I still played Levert in other line. I played a Levert Mitchell Gobert lineup, so that failed. So I'm playing 5 lineups. So
Yep.
I played a non-Levert lineup. This is literally the lineup that I made. I mean, I was gonna play Batum even if George played. It's just that I needed a $4,600 forward eligible player that wasn't a net. And he's going to play 30 minutes. He may not do anything in those 30 minutes, but who knows? I obviously lucked into George not playing, so he fit. But it also allows me to reserve the right to change everything. Like, I planned this lineup to fade that first game. So it wasn't for optionality. It was purely because the first game was chalky. Now, if that game, like you said, if that game went off, Levert has 65 points, and maybe I take a look at this lineup, and the first reaction I would have, I need to get Jokic out.
Yep.
Right? Because you need to get the 41%. How do I build this lineup now without Jokic in it? And maybe if I don't play Jokic, that means I don't play D'Angelo Russell in this lineup because I hope that game fails. And then George ends up being out. I end up playing Kawhi instead of Jokic. I play Cantor in the center spot. And this whole lineup changes around. But it turned out, that's late, that what I planned on, the first game failing, for this lineup to succeed, that first game has to fail. It did. And George sat, so Batum ended up being a good value. So, like, I'm looking at this lineup going, why do I have to change anything in this lineup? Now, in the lineup that I had, Levert, Mitchell, and Gobert, that's the lineup that I'm like, okay, let's see. That was the fade Jokic lineup. So it didn't have any Minnesota or Denver pieces. So like that's the lineup where I'm like, well, I have snowflakes. What do I do? So this is what I mean when we talk about lineups, not players. That like the win condition of the lineup that I just mentioned is with the first game failing, but the win condition of the lineup that I also had is the first game succeeding. So It's not just a matter. Now, you may only be playing one lineup. So maybe you're only playing for one condition. But I'm playing 5 lineups. So I may be playing different win conditions. So when you ask me, are you playing or fading a player? Well, it depends on the lineup that it's in. I know that the lineup that I made with Mitchell, Gobert, and Levert, if that succeeds, the lineup that I'm showing right now, that won $5,000, fails. Like I know, like it's mathematically negative EV to play both of them together because in order for one to win, the other one has to fail. But my goal is to win first place. So like it's very similar to what we do with Showdown. You could play a 5-1 lineup in one direction and a 5-1 lineup in the other direction, and just like I hope one of these teams blows the fuck out of the other team because I don't care which one it does it, but I have the condition that in both those scenarios. So that's thinking in terms of lineups versus who do you think is going to do better today, Levert or Jokic? Like, I don't give a fuck. All I know is I'm probably not playing both in the same goddamn lineup, right? Because then I have no leverage because then I end up being, a chalk lineup. So I think this is what you mean by highlighting. This is the game. Like, even in the small field high stakes where everyone knows this, it's similar to playing the final table of the World Series of Poker. I mean, it's still playing high stakes poker with the 8 opponents that you all look at and you go, is there a bad player here? No.
Yeah.
We just have to hope that I have a big enough edge over the 8 opponents on this day that beats the rake, and you're fine. So that's the only thing that's overall, Eric. That's the reason why I focused on large field GPPs. Because it's hard for me to break out and go, is there an edge in these contests? Let's say I am good enough, which I think I am, to be in your type of contests, right? You would look at me, Eric. I'm assuming, not just because we're recording, that if I was risky enough with my bankroll that I didn't mind playing the Thunderdome every day, that I'm not throwing money away.
No.
Right. Now I'm not going to take that risk, but I could. But if that's the case, then like how if you're taking even 8% rake, 7% rake, like how many deadline? How many? Like how much of an edge? Even if I like how much of an edge anyone could have over each other, but in the large field contest, like I could see it so easily. I could see 10% of lineups that have like such a low projection. They're at the bottom. That is like you have no shot. And then you have 10% of lineups that are like cash lineups that are going to hover in the min cash range that have no shot at first place. And I look and I go, 20% of the lineups at this contest have like no shot at first place. The rake is 15%. So like how am I not just playing these contests other than the fact that it's 100,000 the first, 7th place is a set of steak knives, and you better hope to God that variance goes your way in a whole year in order for you to goddamn bink. Like, to me, that's the concern in those contests. But from an EV perspective, like, even giving that example, Eric, even if there is an edge in the smaller high-stakes contests, it can't ever be higher than in the large field, other than the fact that maybe you get a chance to realize the smaller edge better in the higher stakes small field than, risking going 5 years without being profitable in large field GPPs.
I think that's it. I think you have your edge is smaller with a much higher chance of realizing that edge into first place. Like, true win equity, right? Like I scored 313 points. I'm trying to look at the other like contests that night on DraftKings. Like, we don't need to go into the differences between the contests again, but I wasn't crushing people, but I'm just realizing I just happened to realize that edge in one, right? That one condition, like you talked about, that one scenario. I hit that one thing I needed to get right, basically, and it wins it for you. Like in these larger fields, there's, like you said, you gotta go kind of nutso, right? And hit a bunch of these different things have to go right for you, because it wasn't just fading that game. Like that was like, it was like almost impossible not to win like these 30-man contests if you faded that game, because literally no one faded that game in those contests. I was the only one.
Right. I'm taking a look at the Thunderdome right now, and understand that the Thunderdome is the smallest of small. I mean, this is 21 people. So the Showtime I won was like 400 or something, 350. Yep. 21 is you could legitimately play your cash lineup into these contests. Like
people do,
right?
People do, yeah.
Right. But your lineup, which scored 313, had Lou Williams, had Luke Kennard, had Kawhi Leonard. So basically, you capitalized on the Paul George sitting news. You played Jokic and Hernan Gomez with Russell and DeRozan. You scored 313. But Wilson, who came in second, had like the cash, had Kyrie, Ed Davis, who is like the cheap chalk, right? Lou Williams and Kawhi. He pivoted from. Basically, he played Kyrie. That because he was the chalk.
And Prince, yep.
And Prince, and then obviously when George sat, he moved around to Russell and Kawhi and Lou Williams and played Zach LaVine, who was also 50% owned. So like he didn't fade that game, and he still came in second.
Yep.
Right. So like even Kobe for MVP that came in underneath that. Yeah, it was he played, Irving and Mitchell and Prince. Wancho put up a huge game, so he had that. And then he just pivoted from the Clippers news. But it's like you don't even have to fade it. Like if it wasn't for the fact, Eric, that you faded Kyrie Irving, Wilson would have won.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, just simply fading Kyrie Irving and playing a different lineup won you the Thunderdome.
Right. But I am, so kind of like I talked about with, it's almost like the opposite of what we'll talk about with NFL, where in the situation like that game, just about everyone is popular, and sure you can like fade Kyrie and play whatever, right? Like I don't know, I don't even remember who, maybe Chris Chiosa or whatever. Like there are like I guess technically leverage points like that, but everybody with a strong enough projection was owned in that game, and like I will take it like to this next level, right? Further than any of these guys will in this, and just like bet on my opponents not hitting the nuts. I'm basically willing in these contests, I'm not going to hit the nuts, but I just have to beat these 20 guys, or these 100 guys or whatever. And like, it feels weird saying that, right? Like in football, it's very different. I'm going in like, even in these small, yes, I don't have to hit like the milli maker nuts, right? The Isaiah McKenzie example that we talked about, last week or 2 weeks ago or whatever it was. You don't have to hit, like, I'm not worried about that in any of the stuff that I'm playing. But in NFL, even in the smaller field contests, I believe pretty passionately that like the leverage points and some of that stuff is really important. I think NBA is just a little bit of a different beast, especially this year. We just while we're recording, another game got postponed for tomorrow. It's tomorrow, but there's just a lot of kind of anarchy in the NBA right now. The games are blowing out like 10% more of the time than in previous years. I don't know that that's sustainable. I don't, but it is what it is. It has been true so far this year. Kyrie now we're like, I hope everything is okay. I don't wish ill of anyone, but no one even like knows where Kyrie is. He's off the grid. Like guys are coming down with COVID every day. Teams are playing with 8 guys. Games are getting postponed. We had the shortest offseason ever. Players are resting, and then Kawhi, everyone's assuming Kawhi's going to rest a back-to-back, and he plays his first back-to-back in 5 years or whatever. There's just so much variance, so much more variance than I think than there was before, and definitely more. The millionth time we say definitely more than people are willing to give it to, give credit to. That especially when we get into these small field contests, I'm willing to really embrace a lot more variance, maybe even than I would have in the past, even if it's like not necessarily direct leverage. But I just think like that, like identifying that on every single slate is 100% the hardest part. But that's like my focus all the time. I don't really care about projections, but I'm going in and really, really massaging to try to find my angle. And I'm willing to go a little bit further to find what I think is the right angle. And I think going in knowing like, look, I'm not going to build the nuts. And I don't need to build the nuts, but I need to find the right angle to play to beat this specific subset of DFS players. And it's definitely hard. I don't think I won a slate since this one or something, maybe a cashed one or two, but I don't need to, right? I just need to win X amount of the time. And I just think it's kind of a really unique game right now. NBA DFS is. So I'm approaching it as such.
But you have to assume that other people are also. Like you're not going in going, oh, none of these other sharper players are realizing how much variance now there is with all the variables that you mentioned. So they're doing it too, but you're the edge that you think you have is that you're going to do it better.
Yeah, pretty much. I don't think people take it to as far as they should.
Okay, so you think the edge is that the fragility, that the projections are much more fragile than they have been in the past. It's not, you don't think in terms of the projections are fragile to begin. You think in terms of projections are fragile to begin with. You're playing the kind of anti-projection game to begin with. Yeah. I know Cam Johnson fits into these bills, but I'm not going to fucking play him. Like you're still doing that, but you're accounting for much more variance than even that. You're hoping that other people are just playing NBA DFS like it was last year, not even the bubble. I'm talking about like before pre-COVID, and then exploiting that because you believe it could not be true. We only have a small sample size, but from what we've been seeing, look at how many times that you go on Twitter. Oh, another goddamn blowout! Like you're just sitting there going really like, and you can't predict what game or what side of the game, like it
No.
because people are like trying to predict. Oh, the Magic are going to get blown out by the Bucks, and the Magic did get blown out by the Bucks, but the Magic still got there, and the Bucks didn't get there. That's how ridiculous it is, right? The Magic lose by 24, and the best scoring players in the game are Gordon and Vucevic, and no one from the Bucks gets there because it's all spread out. So it's like even if you did that, right, and then you look and you go, the Nets are shorthanded, they're going to get blown out by the Jazz, and then they blow out the Jazz, right? And then so. It could be an even spread. It could be a wide spread. It doesn't matter.
Everybody plays the Sixers last night, right? Thinking, oh, it's just such a great matchup, and it was. But nope, I never heard anybody say like, oh yeah, I can't play these Sixers because they're gonna. No, I know they only had 9 guys, but like, oh, I can't play these Sixers because they're gonna get crushed by the Hawks, and they were down 30 at like Embiid. They pulled Embiid 4 minutes into the second half because they were losing. They were losing by so much.
Or Westbrook. Westbrook is out for the Wizards, and they're like, well, the Suns are one of the top-rated defenses in the league in this short sample size. The Wizards are awful. I don't know if I can play Beal. They could. No, the Wizards blew the Suns out.
The only reason Beal didn't he kind of broke the slate, but the only reason Beal didn't totally break the slate because they were up by 35 after 3 quarters. Like he could have scored 80 fantasy points or something. So it could 100% what you said. It could absolutely be short term variance, and everything could spin back around. And I think it is also slate dependent, right? When Luka sits out, and we're getting that right now with when you get a bunch of guys that are $3,000 because the whole team is out with COVID, it's a little bit of a different slate than if Tyrese Maxey is 3,000. I mean, even when he was 4,700, it's like. This is not exactly the easiest situation to bet against. It's so difficult for those guys to fail. When Jalen Brunson is 3,000 and Luka's out and all these guys are out, it's a very different situation. But when Cam Johnson is the chalk, right? And we have seen some other slates where I can't think off the top of my head, but the Cam Johnson types, right? James Ennis, when these guys project.
Gary Clark.
Gary Clark, right? When these guys, just because they, like you said, it's a combination of popping in projections, position, I need to fit Embiid and I need to fit Jokic and I need to fit whatever. So that they become popular. But it's like when those guys become popular, I want to play the variance game. Yes, it's more than likely he's going to score 24 or 25 fantasy points, and my opponents are fine with that. But even then, so what? So what if he scored if Cam Johnson scored 25 fantasy points like he does a lot of the time? Does that mean you lose? No, you have a worse projected player than what he probably gets. But I still would rather have Victor Oladipo, right? He scored 40 something and despite shooting 10% from the field or whatever. I just think people are sometimes. I don't mean like the players that I'm playing against or that you're playing against. Some people are sometimes playing, a little bit more unwilling to lose. And so they tie themselves still to this day to those projections a little too strongly. And so right now, at least, I feel like we should take it even a little step further, playing that variance game just with the state of the way. So it's a combination of things. The state of DFS. I know these guys are good. I know that my opponents are putting in good lineups. So I need to try something to take it a step further. Right now, what is working for me is playing a little bit much more volatile style of play than maybe I normally would. And I'm not even playing that volatile, right? When you were playing the MME contest, you were playing much more volatile lineups.
I take a look at your lineups and go, well, they're still not good enough.
yeah, exactly. It's not like I'm sounding here like I'm like, oh, I got to play these absurd lineups. I'm not doing that, but I'm just taking one angle, basically, typically one, maybe 2 angles to a slate that are a little bit more volatile than maybe I would have played last year, or definitely more volatile than I would have played two years ago, right? like we both did it, but like going into a small field and outright fading the Nets without half their team is like something maybe in the past we wouldn't have to do because we didn't need to.
Right, because they'd be under, because what would end up happening if we go back 3, 4, 5 years ago. I mean, obviously go back 8 years ago, it'd be even more different. Like, I'm taking a look at my Showtime contest that I was in last week that we're talking about. Because why not talk about the slate where we both did well, right? Right.
Yeah, exactly.
I made 5,000. You made 90,000. I'm not jealous. Whatever. But I 10x'd. So I mean, so I put in 530. Like I mean, I 50x'd my entry fee. So like, you only 10x'd your entry fee in the Thunderdome. So like, if we
exactly
right, we put it. So I'm just looking at the ownership in the Showtime NBA 30K from back then. Kyrie was 53%. Torian fucking Prince was 42% owned. Jeff Green was 37% owned. Ed Davis was 29% owned. Right? So, I mean, like, this is higher than what was in the large field contest. The large field contest, Torian Prince was not 42% owned. He was like 28% owned. So, like, there's more value to, why don't I just play, he's literally the same price as Juancho Hernan-Gomez.
Yeah.
Like, why don't I just play Juancho? And Juancho was 10% owned. Of course, Torian Prince put up 13.5, and Juancho put up 46.5. So that definitely helps. You get a lot of relative value in that case. But looking at this, it doesn't make me scared to fade anyone. Because these guys are higher owned than even in large field GPPs. It becomes that they're inefficiently owned.
Exactly.
Like, they're all giving you negative leverage. They give you great projection, which is what you need in these large field these small field contests. But you could find projection elsewhere. I take a look at Zach LaVine at 40% owned, going, why can't I play Kobe White at 12% owned? Like, it's not like Kobe White's only going to score 10 points. Like, he's still a good player, right? Instead of playing Lillard, I play McCollum. Instead of playing Jokic, I play Gobert. It's I'm not playing shit players. It's just a matter of like when Torian Prince is 42% owned, it's like I'm not scared. I could fade that. If Kyrie Irving is 53% owned, like it's not like I'm fading him and then playing garbage. I'm playing fucking Jamal Murray. I'm playing CJ McCollum. I'm playing Damian Lillard. I'm playing D'Angelo Russell. I'm naming all-stars here. So like Kyrie Irving is 53% and DeMar DeRozan is 8%. Yes, Kyrie is going to beat DeRozan more times, but not fucking 7 times more often. So when you think in those terms, you could just easily say, I'm not playing Kyrie Irving.
Yeah.
But then once you know that you're fading a 50+% owned player, like the stress of leverage in your lineup just goes out the window.
Right, exactly.
Right? It's just like I don't have to. It's not large field stuff where it's like, okay, then I do that, and then I still have to do something else. Like, I know where the leverage point is. Like on yesterday's slate we had with the Sixers and everything. Like basically it was Maxey and Embiid projected higher than anyone else. And I'm like, I said in the Discord in Roto Grinders, I said, there's no way for you to make a good lineup without at least one of them.
Yeah.
And you're more likely to fade Embiid because there are centers available that were close enough. So now play Maxey and all in any Embiid lineup. If you don't have Embiid, just play 100% Maxey. He projects too highly to do that. But oh my God, I'm gonna fade a 47% owned Embiid. Who gives a shit? That's what you have to do in order to win first place. But you're not going like I think we're both highlighting the same point, Eric, of like. You talk about Galaxy Brain. You're talking about Galaxy Brain in the scope of a 100-man contest, right? So like Galaxy Brain is like, I fade Kyrie and then just build any lineup I want. Like that. That's all. That's all Galaxy Brain you have to be. In large field, when I talk about large field stuff, I'm talking about, well, we're going to stack this. We're going to fade this stack. We're going to flip the construction, and then you look at the lineup and you go, wow, that projection is 27 points off optimal. Like, okay, let's give it a whirl. Let's hope it gets there. Let's go, put it in. Let's see what happens, type of thing. And these contests, you don't have to do that. So, That's why I wanted to come on and you put it you put it right. That the thing that I need to pin up to my computer, my post-it note, is which I knew beforehand. That's why I said like my lineups felt like they were too chalky, and it's you don't need to build the nuts. No nuts building required. Right?
Oh, that's what I'm gonna pin up.
No nuts building required.
Yeah, no nuts building required. But it really is. I'm looking at the lineups. It really is funny when you put it into that context. When you remove like the exact slate specifics, and you look back at that slate. I'm like, well, it's a combination. Again, it usually is a combination, right? This shit is nuanced, but that optionality helps you get to some of this sometimes. Because I didn't know Paul George was going to sit going into it. So you get a little lucky, but that's also part of the game that we're playing, right? But, okay, $4,000 Lou Williams without Paul George. $7,200 D'Angelo Russell without Cat. Taylor Horton Tucker, fine. Min Price, Juancho Hernan Gomez, again, without Cat. Jokic, Kennard, and Kawhi without Kawhi Leonard, and DeMar DeRozan. Like, who on that list was named that like, if you remove like all the rest of the slate contest, you're like, what is that, a fucking cash team? You know, like if you remove everything about the Nets and all that from that slate, you're like, what do you mean? Like we would always play those guys. Like if we
Right, like Eric, what you're saying is, let's say on that slate, which was a short slate to begin with, it was only a 5-game slate. Mm-hmm. If you remove the Nets game completely from the slate, let's say that game could just act like it doesn't exist. Your lineup would be my cash lineup. I mean, like that's like that wouldn't be like that's lit like that was close to what my obviously in cash I was playing Nets, Kyrie and probably either Jeff Green or Taurean Prince in the lineup. But if that game was off the slate, your lineup would be one of the top. If by RG projections, it would have been one of the top 10, if not the top 5, if not the top 1. Right? So like. Yep. And once you put it into that perspective, it's like how contrarian really was it?
Yeah, exactly. It wasn't contrarian at all, aside from removing, like, we're playing Jenga, right? I removed one block, and whatever was left standing is like, yep, looks good.
And then your fate a lot of times is you're not betting on your lineup, you're betting on everyone else's lineup failing.
Exactly. And so I think, we've talked for a little while and I rambled on about some different things, but that's what we're formulating these thoughts as we go, right? That's why it's a real show, because I don't even know. We don't plan any of this.
There's no agenda here. There's no Google Doc for this.
Yeah. We don't even know what the hell we're going to talk about when we hop on. So, like I'm formulating these thoughts as we're talking all that through, but that is, you don't have to build the nuts.
No nuts building required. That's going to be the title of this episode.
No nuts building required. And like, I'm not even really betting on my team. Like I'm just betting that my opponents fail. Right. And like, I'm not projecting them to fail. Was I projecting the Nets to win by? No, of course I'm not projecting the Nets to beat the Jazz by 40, and nobody plays the fourth quarter and all of that. But like, what's the optimal without a certain, like whether it's, remove a game or like take out a certain situation, right? X out Cam Johnson, and now what? Now what do I need? Like, what does this look like? Right. Or X out, like you said, lock Maxey, X out Embiid. Now let's look at what some things that we need to build, and maybe one slate, it's one thing, right? This slate that we're talking about here, it was like, let's just remove that fucking game. And now let's look at it. It's other slates, it might be a couple things, right? Just depending on exactly how much, leverage you need to get against your opponents, like how many things, whether it's collective ownership or whatever, need to go your way. But like, I'm just trying to find, the easiest path to first. And that path is usually some sort of failure. I'm just betting against, some situation.
And then having really enough points. Like this is related to the concept of trying to win the low scoring slates. Mm-hmm. Winning the high scoring slates means that your lineup is extremely chalky and you got that one slight pivot better than anyone else, and you won. But it's hard to win that way because you have to find that slight little thing that makes you different. But when the chalk fails, like, dude, there's so many lineup combinations that could win when the chalk fails. Like, it's not a matter of, like, you could have made probably 10 different lineups of 4v4s that don't include the Nets Jazz game that would have won the Thunderdome. So it just really came down to the Nets failing.
It won by 18 points, and Taylor Horton-Tucker scored 13 points, and DeMar DeRozan is 8,000 and scored 22.
Right.
So it's like, you don't have to hit the nuts, and then you can say, well, yeah, you landed on Juancho, but it's like that's what I think Leone has talked about it multiple times, and I really like how he talks about it. People will say like, oh, did you get too contrarian, or did you do this or that? He's like, no, I'm just giving myself shots at winning, right? And so removing that Nets game and then playing, the best plays that are just so happen to be lower owned. I don't know who's like, I don't really care who's in. It could have been Lou Williams could have scored 40, right? Or Taylor Horton-Tucker could have scored 40, or Luke Kennard. It doesn't matter. They're all just the names that just the next best plays.
Right. They're just names on a spreadsheet. Right. They're just.
So I don't.
Right.
Yeah. DeMar DeRozan would just flip Juancho and DeMar DeRozan score. Who gives a shit? It doesn't matter. Like, you just got one thing right, and then the rest of the points just accumulated as they accumulated.
Right. You could have played Kobe White instead of DeRozan and gotten more points. It wouldn't have mattered. You would have came in first by 30 points. Right. You could have played McCollum in another combination, and you would have won by 22 points. Like your win condition of your lineup, you could have made. You could have legitimately made 10 to 20 lineups that faded that game that could have won. So when people ask, why did you play that guy? There's no answer. This is what gets broken down to in the Theory of Daily Fantasy Sports course, 15-hour audio DFS Masterclass, theoryofdfs.com, about lineups, right? We talk the order. I posted this in the Rotogrinders Discord. I think this is as part of the advanced series, I guess, when we do it. The advanced guide or whatever, that I've narrowed down the mindset shift of when you know that you're thinking about the game properly. Most average DFS players, I put the order of your thoughts. So we talk about the levers, right? Projection, correlation, and leverage. Okay, that's one thing. As far as thinking in these terms, you would the proper way to think is in this order: contests, lineups, players. What contest am I playing? What type of lineups can win this contest? What players fit those constraints that are in those lineups? And it could be 100 different combinations. It could be 100 types of lineups could win this type of contest. That's the way that a good player thinks about DFS. While the average player thinks the opposite way. What players do I want to play? Oh, Kawhi looks nice. Oh, this guy projects well. Oh, this. And then go, how do I fit these guys into a lineup? Right? That's their second step. And then the third is, let me see what contest I want to put this in. Right? Yeah. But now you laugh and you're like, yeah, that's obviously the opposite order that you should be thinking. Because is that lineup good for that contest? Maybe not. Do these players meet this lineup's median, like the full lineup's ownership and median projection? You don't know. That's where you get the people that ask you, I got $4,800 left. I need a small. What's the bet? I need a guard. $4,800. Anytime I know someone asks that question, it's like you're thinking in the wrong order. Like if you got to that point and you're stumped, you probably did something. Your mistake was before that point, yep. Right? It's not like now you need to play the best projected $4,800 guard no matter what the fuck it is. Like, no. But you would agree with that the order of thinking is contest lineups players, and that 95% of what you see, we do content. Because people are thinking in terms of players, lineups, contests, that's when people get frustrated with our answers of, well, it depends on the contest. And they ask me about a player, and I go, well, it depends on the lineup and the contest. And then they go, I don't get it. Well, like, You're at the third step. You're telling me something in the third step without telling me any context in the first two. So what the fuck does the player matter?
Yeah. And I even saw it like on Twitter this morning or in like the Slack groups that I'm in. People, oh, like I played Mike Scott and I knew I should have played Kevin Knox over him, right? I had the feeling about Kevin Knox, and it's like sure, Kevin Knox was fine. Like I'm like congrats, I guess, like for calling Kevin Knox or whatever. But like that yeah, it's just like you get tired. I see why you know. I keep thinking of Overzet's video, like of you just motherfucking everybody.
Because it's the same. It's the same questions every day, and I can explain it 18 different ways to the same people, and just it's like how many times do I have to say the same? It's one of those things we talked about before that people are overcomplicating it. Like it's almost like they like the brain can comprehend that actually you're simplifying things less. Like when they can't comprehend the answer when you said I should have played Kevin Knox over Mike Scott, and I go, well, what were they projected? Like, well, Mike Scott was a little bit better projected than Knox. It's like, so play whoever you want. Yeah. Like it's within the margin ever. Why didn't you play Knox? Well, because Mike Scott was a little bit okay. And if you played Knox because he was slightly, and why did you play Kevin Knox? Because he was lower owned than Mike Scott, and anything could happen. Oh, okay, that's the right answer. Also, they can't comprehend the fact that it's this. You know what drives people nuts? When I tell people I don't predict outcomes. Like, but this is the example of it. I don't know if Mike Scott is going to outperform Kevin Knox today. I don't know. I'm admitting I don't know. The projections are so fragile. They're close to each other. What happens today? Who the fuck knows? All I know is that based on this model, if we ran this out 1,000 times, they would come about this close to each other. What's going to happen on this one day? No fucking clue. So I don't even bother with even thinking about it. But it blows people's minds. It blows. What? You telling me you don't have an opinion on who's going to do better today? No. Why? Oh, I don't even bother thinking about it. And then they go, how do you not think about it? And I go, like, I don't know. Because I'm looking to beat people in a game. I don't think about, is this the time the flush hits for me in poker? Like, I don't think about that either. All I know is that this is the odds of it happening. Is it going to happen? I'm getting the right odds to call, but I need to think. Is it going to happen this one time? Like, no, I don't give a shit. I'm going to be making these choices 1,000 times over the next year. Like, as long as I'm plus EV, I'm going to show money at the end of the year. So, like, what happens today? Who gives a fuck what happens today? Right? But these are the mindset shifts of why you're having those conversations in AMF Slack about, oh, I knew it. In my gut, I'm like, I don't know what gut has to. I have no gut.
Yeah, if your gut really is that good at predicting these things, like you should be printing money. But it's also like it's hard. Like it's totally hard for most people to wrap their heads around. Like, because I will talk about like whether it's in Slack, on Twitter, Discord, DMs, whatever, talking about certain players, but it's in the context of obviously of lineups and a strategy for the slate, but also like fragility, like not only the fragility of like that player's like projection, but the fragility of that player's minutes, the fragility of that, right? Like it's like we talk about, we're using Mike Scott, right, which is just so happens to be an example from last night. It's like when you pulled up the projections early in the morning, like if you're using Roto Grinders, it was just the very first run of projection. He projects for 32 minutes. He's min price because they're expecting him, I guess, to start not thinking about the injury. And it's like, well, shit, yeah, if he plays 32 minutes, like, yeah, give me Mike Scott at 3,000. But then you start to be like, okay, well, hold on, we gotta look. This is his first game. He's old. He has a hurt knee. Like there's this projection is fragile. Well, by the end of the day, they backed it down, but he didn't even play that much. And they're a little bit blowout related maybe, but there's fragility to his projection. So like talking about players in those types of ways can be beneficial, but I think it gets people wrapped up in,
well, now I'm talking about, well, you were talking about Mike Scott then. So you're talking
Yeah,
about
but
players. I'm like, I'm
no,
talking
but
about
what you're doing, what essentially you're doing is talking about probabilities of outcomes. So
Mhm.
there's an outcome on this slate that we're talking about. Like I played some Paul Reed or whatever that guy's name was,
Yep.
thinking that Mike Scott is not going to play more than 20 minutes, but he's a power forward. So I'm like, okay, I'll play Paul Reed at 3,300 in the lineup. There's a probability that Paul Reed plays 32 minutes. There's a probability that Paul Reed plays 8 minutes. There's a probability that Mike Scott plays this. There's a probability that Dwight Howard and Embiid share the court,
Oh
which
God,
is
yeah.
which is what ended up happening.
What
And
happened?
right, which you there's a probability of that, and we're like,
Yep.
oh no, Howard is just going to play the backup minutes, and Tony Bradley's going to do whatever, and they're not going to push Embiid or like. There's all you're talking about are probabilities of these outcomes happening. So when you're talking about the fragility of the projections, you're not talking about, well, I think Mike Scott's going to play 18 and then this guy's going to play this. No, you're just like, there's an 80% probability of that. There's a 60% probability of this. There's a 20% probability of that. There's a 20% probability of this. What is the market judging it as? Right? Yep. So you're looking at those minutes distributions going, I could give an average, but the volatility, this guy, like, look, that Reed guy, all he did was play the backup Embiid minutes. He played like 3 minutes in the first fucking half. If it wasn't for the fact that the game blowed out, he would have had 3 points, right? Yep. But now the game blew out and Embiid didn't play any of the fourth quarter. So Reed just played the next 12 minutes and he ended up getting 13, 15 points or whatever. But I need to go in thinking that that there's a probability of that. I have to average all those probabilities together. In poker, those would be the things like what your opponent is doing, right? You take a look and you go, the guy, okay, I made a bet and then this guy raised X. I look at the board, I look at the hand range that I have, and I go, in my head, I have to estimate 70% of the time he has a hand like this. 20% of the time he has a hand like that. 10% of the time this is pure air, right? He's not even drawing to any outs. And then I have to weigh the money that I'm wagering, what the stack sizes we have behind us and all of that type of stuff, and go, what's my best decision here? I'm not putting him on a hand. I'm saying that 70% of the time he has a top pair, this type of hand, which currently beats me. Now, if I could shove here, and if in those cases, he's going to fold 80% of the time. If I shove and I'm wrong, like he's going to call. The other 20%, I'm dead. I don't even have any outs. Now, if I min raise, there's going to be a certain probability of his actions. If I call, what are his probability of his actions on the next round, right? On the river, on the 5th street. If I draw out on him, is he going to bet into me? How often is he going to bet into me? What's the probability of that happening? What's the probability of me raising and winning the pot in that case? What's the probability? And then you have to combine the probabilities that you draw to your hand or he outdraws you. Like, we're all just thinking in terms of probability. This is what probabilistic thinking is. So it's not, when you even take a look at minutes in projections, it's not, oh, they project for 22 minutes. It's like, no, this could be 18, it could be 26. We see foul trouble. And like Drummond, why did Drummond only play 26 minutes? Like, most likely because he got fucking 3 fouls in the first half. And they sat him. And you wonder why JaVale McGee broke the slate. Right? Like, that's part of what you're looking at. These aren't predictions. They're just, they're ranges of outcomes. And the more that you think in terms of probability, like when you're discussing the minutes of a player, you're not talking about players. You're just talking about how wide is this range? Are people adjusting to this? When you mentioned before, with the COVID situation and optionality, that you don't believe that the field is adjusted properly to you believe that there's more variance this season than there has been in the past, and people are not playing NBA DFS accordingly to that. It doesn't mean you know where the variance fucking goes. You just know that
right.
you just know that if whatever I would normally think of a 60% probability, maybe we have to bump down to a 45% probability, right? Maybe there's a lot more. These rotations may change a little bit. They may run slightly different rotations depending on, because we'll see situations where these two guys are out and those two guys are in, and it's just like you have no sample size. It's gonna be 3 months from now, and we're gonna go, well, what happens when this guy's out and these three guys? Like, we don't even have. Look, dude, half the team has been out all the time, yet we still don't have. You go to Popcorn Machine, you go to Wowie or whatever, you go to Court IQ, and you still see like, nope, these 5 guys have never been on the court together. Simultaneously ever, and you're like, how is that possible? It's been 3 months.
That's exactly what I was going to add. It's like, setting aside just the natural variance. It's like, look at the Sixers yesterday. I don't even know who the fuck Dakota Matthias is. Matthias, like who? I like follow college basketball and everything. No fucking idea who this.
I just joked around that Isaiah Joe was the son of Cotton Eye Joe.
That's what I mean. These guys are like undrafted. Like, this is not even like G League level play. Like, and now it's like, okay, we saw them play, right? We saw them play without Embiid and all these guys. Well, now Embiid's back. What does that mean? Is Tyrese Maxey still going to shoot 30 times? I don't know. Is Matthias just going to stand around? And which is funny because you talk about the blowout thing. Like him, like he was just like. He was the kid like on the high school basketball team that he did not look at the hoop. His job was to be out there and fill minutes because they don't have enough good players on the roster, and just pass it to the good guys. Just get it, and the moment it touches your hand, you pass it to somebody else. He never even looked at the hoop, and I played him, and it's like almost halftime, and I'm like, what the fuck was I doing playing this guy? He doesn't even like. Not only does he barely touch the ball, when he does, the moment he caught it, it was hot potato right back to him.
You look at that spot in your roster and you go, I wish Tony Snell was in this spot. Yes. And he does nothing.
Tony Snell probably had as much upside as Dakota Matthias did if that game did not blow out. So, but like, it just goes to show you, like, dude, this guy was one of the highest projected like plays on a DFS slate. No one knows who he is. We have no idea how he interacts with these other players. So like, and we have the Heat tonight. Maybe we think we have a better idea about how the Tyler Hero, Andre Iguodala, Precious Achua, Myers Leonard Heat is going to look, but we don't really like. We don't know. So it's like it all that just kind of encapsulates like. Dude, even setting aside like rest, the natural, like we're not even fucking talking about the NBA stuff that we used to talk about, right? Maybe this guy gets late scratched. We're not even talking about Colin Sexton got late scratched last night.
Maybe the guy tests positive for COVID at halftime.
Right.
We had Joe Val, right? Didn't Joe Val had to like sit out because they thought that he needed to be contact traced or something? You're like, why the fuck isn't he playing? No one knows. Kyrie Irving is missing. We have no idea what's going on.
Kyrie Irving is off the grid. He's Ron Swanson. He is literally off the grid. Jonas Valanciunas is getting quarantined at halftime of a game, and then he still played the next game. I mean, it's anarchy. This is anarchy, right? So like, we don't know how these players interact with each other. We don't know who's going to test positive when. We don't know. Kawhi Leonard is playing back-to-backs. Right? Like when LeBron James is playing every game. Like they didn't even have an off season. LeBron is almost 40 and he's playing every night. Like there's so much unexpected happening right now. Maybe it stabilizes. I doubt it. Maybe it stabilizes in a couple of months. But as of right now, this is all wildly unpredictable. So I'm trying to kind of, at least in the short term, capitalize on that, and I'll let the Cardis of the world, worry about whether this variance is sustainable long term. But right now, that's kind of where I believe the edge lies.
The only thing that's constant though is that the answer is never Buddy Hield.
Can they
can FanDuel price him up so I don't have to play him?
I played him again just because I had to, and he was actually going to be lower owned this time last night because he was questionable going into it. So I'm like, okay, this is like, I'm like, finally low owned, cheapest he's been, Buddy Hield. Nope, still sucks.
Still sucks. Some things never change. So you can follow Erik Beimfohr on Twitter. I'm at BlenderHD on Twitter. You can buy the course, Theory of Daily Fantasy Sports, 15-hour audio DFS masterclass at theoryofdfs.com. DFS.com. Send in your questions. Obviously, now with the NFL kind of coming to a close, we're talking about NBA slates from last week, from 3 days ago, all at the same time. If you have any questions, broad-based, it could be sport-based, could be anything, email them in, questions@theoryofdfs.com, and go on iTunes and rate and review it. And if you're on YouTube, hit the thumbs up button, hit that subscribe button, hit the notification bell. But just whatever you do, don't play Buddy Hield. And you'll be fine. Subscribe to this podcast and don't roster Buddy Hield. I know that there's no nuts building required, but Buddy Hield is probably still not going to be in the winning lineup.
Ever.
Ever.